Welcome to the Unwashed Asses, episode 118, recorded for Friday, June 14th, 2019. Oof. Got bit by a bug, you guys. Got bit by a bug. It's real bad. It got me a fever. A fever for the Final Fantasy. The finalist of all the fantasies. The fantasies that have been going since the 80s. The fantasies that involve people wearing way too many belts and zippers. Summoning ancient primordial forces that wreak havoc yet obey an 18-year-old military cadet. Fantasies that involve wandering around outside a castle for hours on end to the point where your character is so overpowered they're able just to kind of face roll over any challenges the boss might have posed. Yes, Final Fantasy. It's been a long time since I've gotten bit by this bug. The last one I think I played was Final Fantasy 13 back on Xbox 360. That was released 2013, so it's been about 6 years. Since then, we've had Final Fantasy 14, Final Fantasy, which was the online one, 15, which was the rebranded version of Versus 13, which was supposed to be released simultaneously with 13, and plethora of shitty, overly complicated, and far too large an install size mobile games. I kind of dipped out. 13 was a train wreck where it had a 25-hour tutorial. Once I reached end of said tutorial, I decided, you know what, this game is not for me. Of course, we've had other spin-off titles like the Dissidia series, which I have not played since PSP, which might be older than the 13 title itself. Actually, you know what? The second one, Duodecium, I think came out afterwards. Point being said, it's been at least 5 years since I've touched a Final Fantasy series. Now, folks that watch the Zero Lives shows way back when will say, oh, well, you're a liar. We saw you playing Final Fantasy VIII. Okay, you've got me there. I made it halfway through Disc 1 before quitting and then putting it down. And that doesn't really count because that game came out in 99. It's my favorite. And we've not had any solid new entries. Now, some folks will argue, yeah, 15's good, but I'm looking for classic JRPG Final Fantasy action. And this all came about because mostly I was playing a lot of Dauntless. And Dauntless, especially in the forest zones, going through the trees and whatnot, really reminds me of two games. One is World of Warcraft and the other is Final Fantasy. And I thought, you know what's probably gonna mesh really, really well with this game? The Distant World soundtracks that Square Enix put out. Which, if you ever have the chance to go see and you're even a mild Final Fantasy fan, go watch those symphonies in action. We went to the one up in Milwaukee years ago, and I bawled like a baby. I was so overwhelmed with emotion. It was my childhood come to life, seeing this music. And, oh, holy shit, it's so good. So good seeing it live. Especially when you have the Grandmaster himself, Nobuo Uematsu, directing the orchestra for a couple of pieces. Just mind-blowingly good. So I put those albums on while Mezzy and I were doing some hunts in Dauntless, and it fit extremely well. And then I got an itch. I'm like, ooh, I haven't touched Final Fantasy in a while. And then in between hunts, while we're at the loading screens, I'm flipping through. Creative Uncut is one of my favorite websites out there because it has damn near any video game you can think of. It has their concept art, from environments to characters. It has damn near everything. And so being a gigantic fan of character art the way I am, I like going there because it's like, okay, well, let's search Final Fantasy or Resident Evil or whatever is like tickling my fancy, and they're pretty good at getting artwork very, very quickly. So I was like, all right, well, let's just key in Final Fantasy, and sure enough, Final Fantasy 14 was already on like their top 10 most searched. I'm like, all right, let's go through this, because I have not played 14. It's the online equivalent. It has a subscription fee. My reasoning was I never wanted to get invested into another MMO like I did with WoW and even Destiny to a lesser extent. Like, if I'm going to pick one video game wife, I have to be faithful to her, and yeah, I can have dalliances on the side, but if I'm going to devote a lot of time to a game, I've got to make sure it's the one. So I kind of settled on Destiny, and I vowed, I'm never going to go, whole hog in another game quite the way that I do with this one. But that Final Fantasy bug, it bit me, and I'm sitting there like, ooh, I want to play some Final Fantasy, and the artwork for 14 is looking really, really good, and I'm listening to the soundtrack, and like, fuck it, let's fire it up, because I have the re-release of 8 on PC, and so I picked up my last save, and I'm going through and play through the last of the train heist. I get through Cypher's rebellion at the Timber, I think. Yeah, the town's just Timber, and then Edea comes and recruits him, and now we're trekking through the woods to get to Galbadia Garden and recruit Irvine. And I'm looking at my GFs and optimizing my junctions, and then farming up, because the forest in between the train station and Galbadia Garden is really, really good for AP and levels, and just really throw myself back into it. And then Mezzy pops on the Discord chat. It's like, hey, you ever tried 14? Like, didn't try 11, didn't try 14, but you know what? Fuck it, you've hit me at the right time. I will give this a whirl. And especially since 14 has announced that they're bringing about a Gunblade class in their next expansion, which is set to come out June 2nd. And they're also adding in the bunnies people from Final Fantasy 12, the Chewbaccas of the Final Fantasy world, if I may. Like, I understand they're very highly fetishized, and they're tall, exotic-looking women, and they have bunny ears, so it's kind of like walking Playboy models in Final Fantasy. They're very scantily clad, but they're the Chewies, because at least when I was first introduced to them, the character of that race was Fran, who was essentially co-pilot to the very charismatic pirate. I forget what his name was of Final Fantasy 12, and I loved the two of them together. And I'm like, you know what? When my choices are essentially shitty human, shitty elf, shitty dark elf, and weird midget people, I'm going to lean towards the more exotic Chewbacca. Especially when they don't give me the mage machines that were Vivi from Final Fantasy 9. Like, if I had a choice, that's who I'd roll. I'd roll Vivi. But then I'd be forced into Black Mage and fulfilling my own, quote-unquote fantasy there. So no, the idea is, I'll dive into 14. It looks like they've got a free trial up to level 35, so I can get a feel for it, and then when expansion hits July 2nd, I can decide whether or not I'm going to commit to it. So everything I've heard from folks say it's really, really good and well worth the subscription. I'm definitely hoping so, but at the same time, it's like, I only have so much time. Can I really afford to be invested in an MMO like this? It's like, I just got hooked on Dauntless. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I think maybe halfway through the progression on that game. Can I afford to put it down and be distracted by something else? And on top of that, at E3 this year, they showed off more of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is coming out next March. And then they announced that they're doing a remaster of Final Fantasy VIII, which is coming out sometime this year. And holy shit. Like, 8 was by far my favorite title, just because the advertisement, it really pulled me in with their FMV cinematics that they were playing like before movies as trailers, and the TV spots. I'm like, oh, this is gorgeous. Like, I'm in. I want this. And I'm sure I've told the story before where I ended up buying the game well before I had a PlayStation. I ended up, because the game came out September 9th, 1999, and I bargained with my grandma, like, hey, I'm willing to forego my birthday and Christmas present for a PlayStation. And she ended up getting me the PlayStation, but I had to wait for Christmas. And so when Christmas came around, I'm like, I've got you ready to go, buddy. I popped in disc 1. I was off and away, and like I had, the Super Nintendo, and then I had a Nintendo 64, and I'd played a lot of Ocarina of Time had already been out by then, and like I been having a lot of fun with it. But like games weren't my primary drive up until Final Fantasy VIII. That game changed my entire perspective and really hooked and solidified me on video games as a whole. So that's why it's always going to be my favorite game. Destiny is a very, 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 very close second. But I guess just by nature of 8 being first, I have to give it the top spot, despite Destiny having such a huge emotional and otherwise just large impact in my life. And on top of that, there was always the rumor that Square had lost the source code to Final Fantasy VIII. That's why it took them so long to get it ported to PC. And in an era where pretty much every other Final Fantasy under the sun is getting ported over to Switch, or remade, like they've redone 3 and 5 with completely new graphics and whatnot. It's like, what the hell? What about 8? And I always thought, it was the least popular Final Fantasy because I have a weird habit of backing losing horses. But no, it was a huge surprise to see that announced this year. And while it's not like a full-blown remaster, like, they're not redoing all the environments, it looks just mostly like character models, that's enough for me. Like, I will definitely buy that game again. And now part of me is like, all right, well, I got to finish up this current playthrough of 8 so that when the remaster comes out, I can buy that and then start all over again, because it'll be fresh in my mind, like how shitty the current version of the game looks compared against, a full-on remaster. So, I don't know. I got 14 downloaded this morning. Excited to try it out tonight. So, yeah, I don't know. It's been a long, long time, like I said, since I've been into Final Fantasy, so I'm kind of embracing it, because this was a series that I thought had it and I had gone separate ways. It was going into more action-oriented gameplay. Square for the past 10 years has just been insistent on making all of their systems and games overly complex. They don't know the beauty that is simplicity. And on top of that, they're just filled with melodrama. The stories don't resonate with me the same way that they had when I was a teenager. I've outgrown them at this point, which is sad, but I can always go back and play the old games. But maybe 14, it'll hook me in a similar fashion. And I guess otherwise, I can replay 8, I can buy 9, I can do 10, I can do 12 again. 7, yeah, I'm going to get it for PS4 when it comes out, and maybe that's what's going to make it more tolerable. I didn't like 7. It was okay, but it wasn't anything near the grandeur that were 8, 9, 10, and 12. Those were just masterpieces. Even 12, which got overly political and kind of dry. The Gambit system that it introduced, and then 13 evolved on. 13 had a phenomenal combat system, but it was so fucking handholdy and took so long, literally 25 hours to get through the tutorial before the game actually opened up to you. On top of it, the story was just, again, overly melodramatic. I couldn't get behind it. And, since then, Square's released multiple sequels. I never played 10-2, never played 13-2. So, I guess there's a lot of Final Fantasy out there to scratch this itch. It's just how much I'm willing to indulge, because each game's about a 60-hour investment. That's a considerable chunk of time. So, I don't know. I'm excited. I feel giddy. So, if you have your own fond memories of Final Fantasy, or you want to tell me how wrong I am about 13, even 7, drop an email over at theunwashedasses@gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. And this year, help the show grow. I'm looking forward to I'm tinkering with the idea of doing some live shows. So I'd be curious to see what your feedback is on that, and if we could get enough people to actually show up to one. So let me know, and help the show grow. Tell a friend. Let them know they can get TUA wherever they get their podcasts, or even on the YouTube. And that's going to wrap it up. We have links to Patreon and the store in the show notes. And yeah, that'll do her. We'll talk to you here soon. Blood for the Blood God.